My daughter called me on a Tuesday morning, and the number that showed up on my screen made me sit down on the kitchen floor. Not because I was dizzy, because my legs just stopped working. It had been 26 months since I last heard her voice. 26 months since the front door of my own house closed behind her, and she drove away without looking back. I counted. You do that when someone you love walks out. You count the days the way you count the money in your wallet after you've already spent too much. Out of habit and a little bit of dread. My name is June Hartwell. I am 63 years old. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house in Knoxville, Tennessee, that I've owned for 31 years. I raised 2 children in this house. I made every school lunch, attended every recital, sat in the driveway at 2 in the morning when my son was learning to drive and I was too terrified to go inside. I did everything a mother is supposed to do, and then some things a mother should never have to do alone. Because my husband Ray passed from a heart attack 8 years ago, and after that it was just me and the house, and eventually the silence. My daughter's name is Shelby. She is 38 years old, and she married a man named Davis about 4 years ago. I want to be fair when I talk about Davis. I want to be accurate. He is not a loud man, not the kind who raises his voice or makes a scene. He is something quieter and harder to name. The first time I met him, he shook my hand and smiled and said all the right things. And I had the strangest feeling afterward, like I'd had a conversation and come away with nothing. Not rude, just empty. Shelby had been different with him from the beginning. Smaller somehow. She laughed less. She started calling me back later, then less often, then not at all. I told myself it was adjustment, new marriage, new life. I gave her space because I didn't want to be that mother, the one who clings, who makes her daughter feel guilty for choosing her own life. So I gave space, and the space became a wall. And the wall became 26 months of silence. The last time I saw her in person was Thanksgiving, 2 years before she called. Davis had a prior commitment that day. I never learned what it was, and Shelby came alone, but she wasn't really there. She sat at my table and answered my questions and ate the cranberry sauce I made from scratch every year because she always loved it. But her eyes kept drifting to her phone. When she left early, I walked her to her car and I hugged her and I felt her arms come around me, but loosely, like I was something fragile she didn't want to break, or something she'd already decided to leave behind. 2 weeks later, she texted me to say she and Davis needed some time to focus on their marriage and that they hoped I would understand. I did not understand, but I said I did. The Tuesday she called, I almost didn't pick up. That's the truth. I sat on the kitchen floor with the phone buzzing in my hand and I thought about what it might cost me to answer, to let the hope back in versus what it would cost me not to. I picked up. She sounded exactly the same. That undid me more than anything else. 26 months and she sounded like my daughter, like the girl who used to fall asleep on the couch watching old movies with me, like the woman I used to call my best friend before I became, somehow, a problem to be managed. She said she missed me. She said Davis and she had been doing a lot of work, therapy, she mentioned, and that she wanted to try to rebuild. She asked if she could come visit. Just her for a weekend. No, Davis. I said yes before she finished the sentence. She came the following Saturday. She brought a small overnight bag and a bottle of wine, and she stood on my porch looking like someone who'd traveled a long way and wasn't sure of her welcome. And I opened the door wide and said, "Get in here." And she laughed, and for a moment it was almost like before. We stayed up until midnight the first night. We ordered Thai food and ate it out of the containers the way we used to. And she told me about the therapy, about the things she'd started to understand about herself and about her marriage. And I listened without pushing. I was careful. I was so careful. I didn't ask about Davis. I didn't say a word about the 26 months. I just listened to my daughter talk, and I was grateful. The second day was a Sunday. After breakfast, she asked if we could sit down at the table. She had a folder with her, which I hadn't noticed before. She set it on the table between us and smoothed the cover with her hand, a gesture I recognized. She used to do that with schoolwork she was nervous about, smoothed the paper before handing it over like she could press her anxiety flat. I looked at the folder. I looked at my daughter. "What's this?" I said. She took a breath. She said Davis had spoken with a financial advisor and that they were in a difficult position with some investments that hadn't gone the way they expected. She said they weren't in danger of losing their house or anything like that. She was quick to add that part, but that they were looking for ways to protect their long-term security. She slid the folder across to me. Inside were several pages, legal pages, dense with language I didn't immediately parse. But I am not an uneducated woman. My late husband was a contractor, and I spent 20 years keeping the books for his business, and I know what I'm looking at when I look at a financial document. I took my time reading. Shelby sat quietly. The clock on the wall ticked. What the documents proposed was this: that I would deed this house, my house, Ray's house, the house where my children were born, into a family trust, jointly managed, with Davis listed as the primary administrator. There was language about my right of occupancy for the duration of my life, language about asset protection and estate planning efficiency. It was dressed up carefully, but what it meant, stripped of the dressing, was that my house would no longer be mine. I set the papers down. I folded my hands on top of them. Shelby was watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated. Like a person who has been told to do something and has made themselves believe it was their own idea. "Shelby," I said, and my voice was quieter than I expected. "When did Davis prepare these?" She said his attorney had drafted them. She said it was standard estate planning. She said a lot of things, and I listened to all of them, and when she finished, I asked one more question. "Does your brother know about this?" She looked at the table. That told me everything. My son Patrick is 40 years old and lives in Charlotte. He and Shelby have never been especially close. Not enemies, just different rhythms, different lives. But he is a straightforward man. He is like his father in that way. What you see is what you get. If Patrick had known about this, he would have called me. He would have called me immediately, probably in all caps. He didn't know, which meant this wasn't family estate planning. This was something else. I excused myself to refill my coffee. I stood at the counter with my back to Shelby for a moment, and I breathed. I thought about 26 months. I thought about the phone call on Tuesday that had made my legs stop working. I thought about Thanksgiving 2 years ago, and her arms around me, loosely, like something she'd already decided to leave behind. I came back to the table and I sat down. "I'm going to need some time to have my own attorney look at these," I said. Shelby's expression shifted. "Davis said this is time sensitive." "For whose timeline?" I asked. She didn't answer. I told her I loved her. I told her she was welcome to stay the rest of the weekend, that the guest room was hers, that none of this changed how I felt about her. And I meant every word of that. I meant it in the way that only a mother can mean something, completely and at a cost. But I did not sign the papers. She left that afternoon. Early, before dinner, she hugged me at the door, and this time her arms were tight. Desperate, almost, and I held her back just as tight, and I whispered that I wasn't going anywhere, and I meant that too. Then I watched her drive away, and I went inside and called Patrick. He called me back in 11 minutes, which is a personal record for him. I told him everything. He was quiet for most of it, which with Patrick means he is thinking rather than speaking, and then he said, "Mom, don't sign anything. I'm calling an attorney first thing tomorrow." I told him I already had one in mind. Her name is Sandra Okafor. She handled Ray's estate when he passed, and she is the kind of woman who speaks plainly and charges fairly and does not waste your time. I called her first thing, Monday morning, and explained the situation, and she asked me to bring the documents in. I did. We sat in her office for 2 hours. What she found in those pages, once she had time to go through them carefully, was not criminal. It was not the kind of thing that would end someone in handcuffs, but it was designed, very deliberately designed, so that once I signed, any significant decisions about the property would require Davis's approval. Selling, refinancing, renovating above a certain dollar amount. And the right of occupancy language had a clause, small and buried, that referenced my capacity to maintain independent living, which is attorney language for if someone decided I was no longer capable of living alone, that assessment could be used to challenge my right to stay in my own home. Sandra set the papers down and looked at me over her reading glasses. "June," she said, "I want to ask you something directly. Do you believe your daughter came here on her own?" I thought about Shelby's hands smoothing the folder, the way she'd looked at the table when I asked if Patrick knew. "No," I said, "I don't." Sandra nodded slowly. She said that what she recommended, first and foremost, was that I do nothing. Do not sign, do not respond to any pressure through informal channels, do not engage Davis directly. She said I should also update my own estate documents, my will, my power of attorney, all of it, to reflect my current wishes clearly and without ambiguity. I updated everything. I named Patrick as my power of attorney. I named Sandra as the executor of my estate. I drafted a letter to keep on file explaining in my own words why these decisions were made and when. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my neighbor, Harriet. Not the Harriet from the names file. A different woman. A real woman who has lived 3 houses down from me for 22 years and knows exactly where I keep my spare key. I asked her to check in on me more regularly. I told her a little of what had been happening. She brought over a pound cake and stayed for 3 hours, and we talked about everything and nothing. And when she left, I felt less alone than I had in a long time. I didn't hear from Shelby for 2 weeks after she left that Sunday. When she called, it was a short conversation. She said Davis was upset that I hadn't moved forward with the paperwork. I said I had spoken with my attorney and had decided not to proceed. She said she hoped this wouldn't affect things between us. I said I hoped so too, and that was the truth. What I didn't say, what I have not yet said to anyone but Sandra and Patrick, and now you, is that the weekend she came back? The weekend she sat at my table with that folder? I also noticed something. She had a bruise on her forearm. Faint, yellowish at the edges, the kind that's a week old. She was wearing a cardigan and it showed only when she reached for her coffee cup. She pulled her sleeve down quickly, automatically, the way you do when you've had practice. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. I have thought about that bruise every day since. Here is what I know. At 63, after raising 2 children and losing a husband and keeping a house and keeping a business and keeping myself together through more than I ever expected to have to keep together, love is not enough to protect someone. Not if they don't want to be protected. Not yet. You cannot reach into another person's life and pull them out before they're ready to go. But you can stay. You can stay visible and reachable and unchanged so that when they are ready, if they are ready, they know where to find you. I called Shelby last week, not to talk about the papers or Davis or any of it. I called to tell her I'd found the box of her old things while cleaning out the hall closet. A yearbook, some photographs, the bracelet she thought she'd lost before prom that she'd cried about for 2 weeks. I told her the box was here whenever she wanted it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thanks, Mom." And then she said, "I missed the cranberry sauce." I told her I'd make it any time she came. She said, "Maybe soon." I said, "I'll be here." And I meant it. I am going to be here, in this house, with my name on the deed and my neighbor's number in my phone and my attorney's card in my wallet, and the guest room made up and the cranberry sauce recipe memorized so well I could make it in the dark. I am going to be here, and I am going to wait, because that is what mothers do when everything else has been taken from them. We stay. We keep the door unlocked. We hold on to the bracelet, and we wait for the knock. I keep thinking about that folder, the way Shelby smoothed it with her hand before she pushed it across my table. That small, nervous gesture I'd watched her do since she was 9 years old, pressing her homework flat before handing it to a teacher. Some habits don't change. Some people don't change either, not on their own and not quickly. I don't say that with anger. I say it because I had to learn it the hard way. At 63, sitting in my own kitchen with my late husband's house at stake, what Davis was counting on was simple, that I loved my daughter enough to stop thinking clearly. And he wasn't entirely wrong about the love. But he miscalculated what that love was made of. He assumed it was the soft kind, the kind that folds under pressure, that signs things just to keep the peace, that lets a bruise on a forearm go unmentioned because naming it might break something. He didn't know that the same love that kept me up at midnight worrying about my children is the same love that kept me in my attorney's office for 2 hours on a Monday morning, going through every page. That's the thing about the choices we make under pressure. They reveal us, not who we wish we were, who we actually are when the stakes are real. I won't pretend I wasn't tempted not to sign. I never seriously considered signing. But I was tempted to smooth it over, to say something vague and non-committal, let Shelby leave feeling okay, and deal with the consequences quietly. I've done that my whole life, kept the peace, made it easier for everyone else. Swallow things that should have been said out loud. This time, I didn't. This time, I sat still, and I read carefully, and I asked the questions that needed asking, even when her face told me she didn't want to answer them. And then I called Patrick, and then Sandra, and then I sat in my kitchen alone, and I let myself be sad. Not panicked, not furious, just sad. Because my daughter had been sent to my table to do something she couldn't have fully believed in, and she'd done it anyway. That's the part that stays with me. Not the documents, not the legal language, or the buried clause about my capacity to live alone. It's the bruise on her forearm, yellowish at the edges, already a week old. And the way she pulled her sleeve down without thinking. I can't fix that from the outside. I know that. I've had to accept it the way you accept a diagnosis. Not gladly, but honestly, because denial doesn't help anyone. What I can do is stay upright, stay clear-headed, make sure my name is on my own deed and my attorney's number is in my phone, and my door is unlocked for the day she's ready to walk through it on her own terms. What I learned, really learned, not just the kind of knowing you carry around without feeling, is that protecting someone you love sometimes looks nothing like what you imagined. It doesn't always look like an embrace. Sometimes it looks like sitting quietly across a table, not signing a single thing and saying, "I'm still here, and I am not going anywhere. And when you need me, I will be exactly where you left me." That's what I have to give. A steady place. An unchanged address. Cranberry sauce from scratch, made the same way every time she comes home. I hope she comes home.